Michael Cohen testifying for over 6 hours. It continues tomorrow. And under oath, this star witness made statements that the jury will either believe and that help prove the prosecution's case or that they may doubt. But either way, this is not one of those whodunits where you're kind of piecing together, texts and surveillance footage. You have the guy who was in the room where it happened, who says he's the fixer, who went to prison for this defendant and now is discussing under oath what went down. He says the payments went to these two women for campaign purposes, that Trump was in on it from the start, that Trump did direct them, that Trump said when it came to paying Stormy Daniels, just do it. Cohen is in a position to know these things, and prosecutors will argue that where he is now, having finished a prison bid, is a place where he has every incentive to tell the truth under oath and every disincentive to risk going back to prison. They will also say that all of this matters, and you'll hear some of this in the closing argument, and we know this from the way they've telegraphed the case. It matters because he was in on it. That because there are crimes, not unlike a mafia case, and I'll come back to that, when there are crimes and you need evidence, it will often come from other people close to the criminal enterprise or even a part of it. Can't all just be clean hand witnesses. They will say that's why the prison time can't really be held against him in this sense. People can judge him personally, morally, or otherwise, but the jury's only question is he telling the truth now or not? The fact that he went to prison doesn't mean automatically not. So he is potentially devastating. There's also the weakness. The defense team, we know, will be attacking Michael Cohen probably unlike any other witness because of what I want to get into with you right now. The long and winding road of Michael Cohen. He was not only Trump's personal attorney, but he was the one who went even farther than most in Trump's orbit by their own peculiar standards of loyalty and rhetoric, announcing to the world he'd take a bullet for Trump. Today he was on the stand, reminding everyone under oath, yes, he was the fixer, doing the dirty work. But at the time, he had a mentality, he recounts, that meant he was honored to link up with Trump in those early heady days of 2006. With his own legal and business career shifting into something that to him in New York felt much more high profile and high stakes, with more glitz and glamour. That when he completed tasks for Trump, he felt like I was on top of the world. And maybe in his own way, in his own mind, he was, until the fall. Now that, back then, is the Michael Cohen that people saw as they first learned more about the top folks in Trump's orbit when it became evident, a more serious type candidate in 2016.
I know Mr. Trump. I've stood by him shoulder to shoulder for the past decade. I think he's a wonderful man. I'm obviously very loyal and very dedicated to Mr. Trump. I'll do anything to protect Mr. Trump, the family, now Vice President-elect Pence, as well as the campaign. I think he's going to be a great president. Mr. Trump has a significant number of people. I'd like to keep myself in that little circle of extremely loyal people.
Extremely loyal. That was then. But as we chart what happened, what is key to how we got here with Cohen as state's evidence, as the top witness against his former boss, the person who could get him a felony conviction, who could be a part of that, could be part of a jail sentence, could be part of impeding Donald Trump's quest to return to the White House. Well, to get there, you have to understand, to quote Chinua Achebe, how then things fell apart, because it was fast. In 2018, the feds raided Cohen's offices. They seized records, and it became clear that whatever might have touched Trump, who of course was then president and had a type of temporary federal protection against federal charges, they were finding dirt on Cohen. But even amidst that rocky process, Trump and Cohen's relationship initially seemed like it might hold. Trump attacked the raid as disgraceful, and Cohen initially seemed like maybe he would stand by his boss. Of course, for anything federal, if his boss was willing to extend himself, he could legally pardon Cohen, early or late. Might be controversial, might look guilty, but he could do that. But here's what you have to remember about Donald Trump. He doesn't do that kind of stuff, even for his loyal fixer, even when his loyal fixer was clearly facing prison time. So as a practical matter, even though Trump had that power and could have done it, whatever he thought the risks were, political or otherwise, it became clearer Trump wasn't going to do that. He wasn't even paying the legal bills. Trump wasn't paying those for Cohen. So if you're not getting like temporary money from the guy who will put up his own money for you, you might not be on your way to get a pardon. And Michael Cohen began to understand what others have lived through around Donald Trump. That he would not just be thrown under a bus, that he would be lodged under a bus and driven back and forth until his body was broken, while Donald Trump watched from the sidelines and said, "You see the guy with the broken legs? It's his fault. I didn't do anything." That was a key shift in this long road.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth or allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
That on Air Force One was the sound of a very powerful man unleashing a torrent of questions and scrutiny and legal heat on the man who actually allegedly did the crimes for him, along with a lot of other potentially legal dirty work. And as the Times reported in an exhaustive account, that contributed to Cohen's decision to, quote, turn on a man he had long idolized. Cohen flipped. He cooperated with the feds. He pled guilty to his own crimes, including this key crime that led him, that you see here in overhead footage, to walk into a federal prison. A federal election crime. That was his day going in. And he began to denounce Trump in all forums. I should note at times that's gotten him in trouble, including recently the judge in this very case objecting to the potential unfairness of Cohen unloading on Trump in live videos. Here, this was him under oath to Congress. You can see Lanny Davis in the background. He also told us his views on the beat.
Donald cares for no one or anything other than himself. I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later.
And that's how we got all the way here. To paraphrase the Grateful Dead, everything leading up to this day. So what happened today? And how will jurors take today and the coming days, when we've been told by the DA's team they're going to rest as soon as this week, and how will they take it all in, as well as the potential complications of the road we just revisited? Because there is anger there, and there is credibility there. There is a criminal record, and there is a, by any standard, complicated relationship with defendant Trump. The short answer, as we go through our special coverage, is we don't know. Makes it kind of interesting when we don't know. The legal answer is, let's be clear, there is nothing unusual about prosecutors, as I mentioned earlier, leaning on the eyewitness account, evidence, and testimony of people implicated in crimes. So close that they were potentially just really friendly with thugs or gangsters, or that they were, in some sense, part of the operation. In fact, having someone flip from inside the enterprise can be one of the best things for prosecutors. So let's take an example, and I want to be clear. We are talking about the example of using implicated testimony. We are not comparing the underlying crimes. This is a business fraud case. We're about to go into a mob case. But the idea actually is stronger for the DA, because if you can believe someone who steals full-time for a living, or lives on the other side of the law for a living, or is involved, God forbid, in murder for hire, if you can believe that person as testimony because you figured out they're telling the truth, well, by that standard, this business fraud lawyer looks even more palatable. So let's take a New York case. John Gotti, on trial for mob-related murder and racketeering. But it was a confidant at the top, not someone who was just peripheral, not an accountant or a witness. No, it was someone you may remember the name, Sammy the Bull Gravano, who provided some of the most incriminating testimony in a federal courtroom against the alleged mob chief, John Gotti.
Gravano, considered the most significant mob defector in history, was John Gotti's right-hand man. Until October, when Gravano flipped, as they say.
Once Gotti's closest confidant has told a federal court about the killing of Gotti's predecessor, Paul Castellano.
It was a good, loyal soldier. John barked and I bit. The words belong to Sammy Bull Gravano.
He held a burning picture of a saint and took an oath of silence. If I ever break my oath, he said, may my soul burn like this saint. Assistant U.S. Attorney John Gleeson asked, "Are you breaking that oath now?" Gravano replied, "Yes."
Are you breaking that oath now? Yes. There are parallels here, including the dramatic, histrionic, almost life follows art level of these vows. And make no mistake, as they say in court, these are vows to hide and lie. So they do complicate the testimony for the jury when somebody comes along, in this case, the people. That's how they refer to the prosecutors, representing the state, representing the people. And the prosecutors say, well, now you can believe them. But we have seen in heavy, serious cases, juries look at the evidence and say, well, if they were involved in the crime and there's enough evidence to show that now they are really telling the truth, then burning vow or not, oath broken or not, if it is now the real final true story, it may work in the case. As for the one I just mentioned, it was a month later after what I just showed you when a jury convicted Gotti of murder and racketeering. A big deal after he'd beat other cases. It was that testimony, Sammy the Bull, that made the difference. Prosecutors are betting here that after all the corroboration they've provided, they have put this star witness, Michael Cohen, in a position to be a type of Sammy the Bull, to be the insider that the jury doesn't have to love, the jury doesn't have to have dinner with him, and the jury doesn't have to believe he told the truth the whole time. They just have to believe that in this testimony, starting on this day that we're living through together, that starting this Monday morning and through the rest of this week, he told the whole truth and nothing but the truth.